And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday, the 18th of February 2022. Well, it's a beautiful day out here in Brisbane today, a warm day, 28 degrees and, of course, sunny and beautiful as always. Well, it's wonderful to have your company, and today we will be very soon joining with that press conference with our Premier, and then later on we'll go through all our news. And we'll finish off with the Daily India report with Himanshu for today. So that's what we've got aligned for you today. Let's get into the mood. And hey, have you heard about the hotel quarantine ending? Yes, the hotel quarantine is going to be ending. And I think the last person in the hotel quarantine will be discharged today. So hopefully things might start getting back to normal. As we know, in many places the restrictions are being eased, even in India, as the numbers. Look, this had to happen. Everyone, whoever had to get it, would have got it, and would have spread. And right now we need to plan to live with it. So we are on to that stage now. So when we look at all these things, so, it has been a long path all the way getting up to here. And do you reckon it was all worthwhile? Well, what do? These are things that you have to get through with that. And once, so right now, let's go to the Queensland Parliament House. Let's see if we can be joined, connected to that live news brief of this morning.
Yeah. And
we are ready. Australian Radio is ready.
People in public hospital at the moment, 34 in ICU. Our vaccine coverage is 92.45% at least one dose and 90.48% double dose, and 62.64% of the eligible population have received their boosters, and 5 to 11-year-olds is 41.66%, so that's fantastic news. So I'll hand over to Dr. Gerard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Premier. So sadly we have 9 deaths to report today. This includes 6 people in their 70s, 2 in their 80s and 1 in their 90s. Of these 9, 3 were not vaccinated, 2 had received 2 doses of vaccine and 3 had received 2 doses of vaccine and 3 had received boosters. 6 of the people who died were in residential aged care facilities. Again, our thoughts are very much with their family and friends. In terms of hospitalisations, it's stable at the moment. We have 384 people in our public hospitals being treated for COVID-19, about the same as yesterday when it was 382, and 33 people of these 33 are in intensive care. It's the same number as yesterday. In our private hospitals, 24 patients being with COVID-19. There were 26 yesterday. In school-aged children, again, numbers are fairly stable. 1,702 cases to report in the last 24 hours. There were 1,668 reported yesterday. And as I've said many times, the vast majority, if not all of these, have mild illness. There's been no increase at all in the number of hospitalisations among children since schools returned last week. 912 cases among the 5 to 11-year-old age group and 790 in the 12 to 17-year-old age group. I'll hand back to the Premier. Oh, sorry, go. Sorry.
Given these figures and at the end of the week, where are we at this stage?
Well, as we've said a number of times, we're heading towards the end of our wave. I've said previously, it's looking at the waves of the pandemic overseas and interstate, it's generally been about 1 month up and 1 month down. The pandemic wave began here in Queensland between Christmas and New Year. So that started in the Gold Coast. It didn't start quite evenly across the state, but we're effectively will come to the end of the wave at the end of this month. Now, what happens in the tail beyond that is still somewhat unknown, because the whole world has experienced this Omicron wave almost simultaneously. So we don't have there's not a lot of other countries that we can look to see what happens, because we've all been within a few weeks of each other and experiencing this Omicron wave. I think well, as we've said before, things have gone significantly better than we had expected in terms of hospitalisations, intensive care, admissions, etc. We were projecting significantly higher numbers than expected, and there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this is due to the wide-scale vaccination. Some of our epidemiologists have been doing some estimates on what would have happened were there not vaccination, and we're talking thousands of deaths and hospital system overrun. So wide-scale vaccination before we experience the wave is what has meant that Queensland has coped well with this wave of the pandemic.
Premier, the review of the restrictions from last week, is there any chance, given these figures, the doctor said that you might make a decision before the end of the month?
I will definitely let Queenslanders know before the end of the month about what restrictions will be eased. I hope to meet with Dr Gerard over the next couple of days, and we'll work through what those easings of restrictions will look like.
What would we be looking at from last week?
Well, don't forget, New South Wales and Victoria have announced their easing, but they were a couple of weeks ahead of us in the wave. So I think that's a fact that needs to be conveyed to the people of this state. But secondly, we're now coming off that wave, those numbers are coming down. But don't forget, still we have around 40% of our children that are vaccinated, and the wearing of masks is helping to stop some of that transmission. Yep.
So we might use next week.
Definitely before the end of the month, so people know they'll have plenty of advance, and hopefully we keep that trend coming down. That's going to be fantastic news. Okay, now I might move on to electricity. So at the moment we know that households, a lot of people are doing it tough across this state, and it has been a firm commitment of my government to keep our assets in public ownership, but also to have that asset dividend go back to households and families. So today we're very pleased to announce that the government took the decision yesterday that we would be giving an electricity asset dividend rebate of $50 to households. This will be in people's electricity bills that they receive in the third quarter of this year. So we understand that some households are doing it tough, and this is another commitment of our government to continue to ease with those cost of living pressures. And I'll hand over to the Energy Minister, Minister de Brenni.
Thank you, Premier. As the Premier said, we understand that every dollar counts for Queensland households. And currently we are working on an energy plan that will outline and chart our pathway to a clean energy future for Queensland, including cheaper electricity. But we're also determined to put downward pressure on prices and ease those cost of living pressures for Queensland households right now. And our proud ownership, as the Premier has said, of Queensland's power companies means we can again deliver $50 back into the pockets of Queensland households. Now, the Australian Energy Regulator has just this morning pointed out that a combination of high peak demand, the outages at a number of large power stations in Queensland, combined with very high coal and gas prices globally, has resulted in a forecast increase in the default market offer. Now, the default market offer is the maximum that electricity retailers can charge in southeast Queensland, and around 11% of households in Queensland who, for whatever reason, have not chosen to seek out a better market offer remain on the default market offer. And our government recognises the pressure on Queensland households, and we also recognise that over the course of the pandemic, more Queenslanders have been at home using more electricity. And so that's why we have responded today with this $50 asset ownership dividend going back to Queensland households. Now, Queenslanders can save themselves even more if they do shop around. For example, the average Queensland family can seek out better offers, saving them around $523 a year. But the best way to ensure that Queenslanders and their power prices remain affordable is to invest in more renewables, particularly in energy storage. And because Queenslanders own their power assets, we can continue to keep downward pressure on prices. And we know with this dividend announced today that they will be $50 cheaper for Queenslanders. And we also know...
So there we go, $50 cheaper in the bills. That is a good news coming out of the Queensland Parliament this morning when there was the press conference that happened this morning. Well, looking at all that, it is some good news. One is that, there's more focus on renewable energy. Number two, making it more affordable as well, so that, as he mentioned, that every dollar counts. So yes, it does. It is, very, very hard for people to make ends meet. So, every little bit will count. Well, let's go to the Federal Parliament, where it was the last sitting day. What took place?
Laura Tingle joins me now from Canberra. Laura, I gather that Dave Sharma, the MP we saw in your package, isn't the only member of the government jumping on national security figures.
That's right, Lee. Later this afternoon, Senator James Paterson, who's the chair of the Joint Intelligence and Security Committee, also weighed in. He basically said that the comments by Mike Burgess had been over-interpreted, which is interesting given a lot of this debate started when you could argue that Mike Burgess's comments in a speech last week had been over-interpreted by the Defence Minister Peter Dutton. But he then also launched into a fairly extraordinary spray at one of Australia's most senior bureaucrats over a very long time, Dennis Richardson, who we also saw in the package, a former head of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, of Defence, a former head of ASIO and an ambassador to the United States under the Howard government, and essentially implied that Dennis Richardson had sort of a problem on his hands because he had lobbied on behalf of Huawei after Huawei had given his football club a sponsorship deal.
Laura Tingle, on another matter, we saw two Liberal MPs, Bridget Archer, she's the Tasmanian MP who last week crossed the floor on the religious discrimination bill, plus the retiring MP John Alexander, hold a press conference with the crossbench calling for a debate on a National Integrity Commission. Now, the independent MP Helen Haines has put up her own proposal for an Integrity Commission. Why couldn't the Haines bloc have just pushed for her bill to be debated this week if there were at least two government MPs who might have supported it?
Well, this is interestingly, it goes back to a story we covered a couple of weeks ago. Essentially, you need an absolute majority to get a crossbench piece of legislation onto to be debated. Because of pairs, because of COVID and border closures, that just wasn't possible. But the speculation has to be whether if Helen Haines and the crossbench had just one of those MPs supporting her legislation, it would have actually got through. So it does leave it very clear that it's a very close thing for the next Parliament.
Laura, the federal government would have hoped for a reset this week after a horror parliamentary session last week, but it's still being buffeted by events and mired in controversy. It's ending this parliamentary session talking more about the dangers of voting for Labor than it is prosecuting a legislative agenda. Here's Chief Political Correspondent Laura Tingle.
I have heard some powerful voices argue that the coalition should open a political front against the Labor Party on the issue of domestic national security. I could not disagree more strongly. One of the main reasons why the government has earned the confidence of the public on national security policy is that there has never been a credible suggestion that political motives have intruded.
George Brandis was the last Attorney-General to have full responsibility for the Australian Security and Intelligence Organisation before Malcolm Turnbull's sweeping reforms moved ASIO to Home Affairs. In his farewell speech to the Senate, Brandis criticised his own party for using anti-terrorism laws as a political weapon.
Nothing could be more irresponsible than to hazard the safety of the public by creating a confected dispute for political advantage.
Yet, in the past week, the government's been trying to use national security for political advantage, weaponising comments by the head of ASIO, seeking to create the appearance of divisions on national security, and using increasingly inflammatory language to suggest that Labor's leadership is variously the preferred candidate of the Chinese Communist Party or even the Manchurian candidate.
I don't believe that anything is confected in terms of the actions of the government. What the government has sought to do at each and every step, Senator Keneally, is legislate the type of reforms I was talking about.
So you believe phrases like Manchurian candidate is not politicizing national security?
Senator, having debates that highlight the differences in what people have said, the differences in track record of parties, and the leadership that the government has shown. These are all legitimate, fair, Senator.
But in an extraordinary series of developments, the national security establishment is fighting back.
The foreign interference is against all members of Parliament, so it doesn't go after one particular party or the other.
Well, can't make your job any easier when politicians do politicise it.
So I'll leave the politics to the politicians, but I'm very clear with everyone that I need to be that that's not helpful for us.
This was a rare intervention by the head of ASIO, but while Mike Burgess may have been pointed, he was still clearly being careful with his words. One of his predecessors, Dennis Richardson, was more forthright this morning.
Seeking to create the perception of a difference where none in practice exists for straight-out party political purposes is something that we've not seen an Australian government do for decades, and it does not serve the national interest by any objective standard.
No, it doesn't. So there you are. You had it. It is all happening out there, and the national security has been on the forefront. But what's been happening behind the scenes or behind the music has been put?
The Prime Minister surprised the nation when he whipped out a ukulele during an interview on 60 Minutes this week. Now 7:30's resident satirists Mark Humphreys and Evan Williams have the behind-the-scenes story of that unforgettable musical moment.
Take me to the April sun in Cuba. Oh.
You can't teach that.
There we go. Wow, bravo.
The thing you have to understand about Scott Morrison is he's more than a musician. Apparently he's an elected representative, which is news to me. I always thought he was a hairdresser.
There you go, and then I forgot the second bit.
If there's one thing Australians are looking for in a leader, it's musicianship. And Scott's got that in spades. One very tiny spade. Basically what you find inside a packet of Whiz Fizz.
Bruce, son in Cuba.
I always knew he could nail the chords. Scott's very imaginative with his hands. You know, he can see handshakes where others can't. I haven't felt this excited about one of my artists since 2012.
No Whyalla wipe out there on my TV. No Whyalla wipe out there on my TV. No Whyalla wipe out there on my TV. Shocking me right out of my brain.
Don't go for another one, Craig, you'll lose the magic. And in 2006, I had a couple of young blokes who they just sang like angels.
That's the reason sometimes I'm feeling under.
That's the reason sometimes I'm feeling down.
There's no wonder sometimes I'm feeling under.
Gotta keep my faith alive till love is found.
These guys are going to be the next Simon and Garfunkel. But Scott, he's different. He really was.
I love that report, yes, love the studio too. Moving on, right now, COVID sends, 3 times more workers on sick leave. So here's that report.
Software engineer Carl Connell has just started a new job.
Oh, okay, cool.
He wasn't even looking for one.
I was just sort of sitting at my desk one day at my previous job, and then Greg called me up and then sort of said, why don't you come down and see the place?
Recruiting workers is getting harder as more people find jobs. And added pressure, the Omicron variant meant less people were at work in January. Almost 9%, or 159 million hours, were lost as people took time off to recover or isolate from the virus. 13,000 people started a job in January. There are now more than 13.2 million working Australians, the most ever recorded. But the unemployment rate didn't change.
Australia remains only one of a very, very small set of nations across the world that has got more of their citizens in work now than pre-pandemic.
We've got job vacancies at record highs, so we know there's a lot of demand for labour.
Renee Baltov is feeling that demand. She's been struggling to hire enough staff and hopes it'll get easier once the international border comes down.
Providing Australian jobs is one of my priorities, but when you're faced with people standing at the door and no one to cut their hair
and once again, that is a balancing act because, people do need workers in the workplaces, but finding the right fit, someone who's really, really willing to put the hours in, sometimes can be challenging as well. Of course, a job is a job, meaning that when you are in a job, you got to do the job. So many times, people do come in and then it is not right job for them for once, and then they cannot fit in, then they really have to move on there as well. Well, right now, the Australian Medical Association wants some more clarity over the borders reopening.
Well, we're finally seeing the expected uptick in cases. As we know, Omicron spreads very quickly through communities, but for WA it's been a little bit of a different story now. Almost a couple of months into our battle with Omicron, we've seen very low case numbers up till now. We still have no one in hospital, and we've had a single death, tragically, in a patient who had Omicron, but that's a very different experience a couple of months in than what we've seen in other states.
Do we know what the modelling is, the WA modelling on how that's going to progress?
Well, the modelling has been kept secret by the McGowan government. They've not released it, and they've said because it's inaccurate, which I think is really proving to be the case, because it is baffling everyone that we've just seen relatively low numbers. And I think that points to the effectiveness of our extremely high vaccination rates. 95% of people over the age of 12 with 2 doses, up almost 99% with a single dose. And that puts us in a unique situation worldwide as we start to battle Omicron.
So does this mean that there needs to be a new reopening date for WA?
Many West Australians are expecting and looking forward to the new opening date. Some felt somewhat betrayed by the decision not to open up as promised on the 5th of February, despite those vaccination rates. But now that we have far more cases in the community than we're seeing coming through the borders, whether they be international or domestic, and now that we're seeing that in fact our vaccination rates are meaning we don't have anyone in hospital, there's a couple of pretty good reasons why now is the time for us to be battling Omicron rather than getting closer to winter. And I think
now is the time, you quite rightfully said. Of course, right now in the last report, before we go to Daily India report, let's take a look at what the pandemic, the situation and the grim toll that is still taking on aged care.
I would describe Nan as funny, cheeky, a little bit naughty. She always just wanted to be loved. In the last few weeks, she was suffering mentally, emotionally, physically. She was not in a good place. She would like to do for the service.
In the final weeks of her life, Lottie Meek's family say the 87-year-old became a shadow of her former self. She had been confined to her room amid a COVID outbreak at Jetta Gardens aged care home south of Brisbane, and died after contracting the virus.
I feel like the weeks leading up were a gigantic factor in her death because she was so worn down. She had just given up.
Jetta Gardens has the unenviable title of Queensland's worst aged care home for COVID-related deaths. Lottie's daughter and granddaughter are angry because it submerged the federal aged care regulator, raised concerns last year about the facility's lack of preparedness for a COVID outbreak.
We put her in there to receive good care, we put her in there for them to look after her needs, not for this to happen.
Jetta Gardens was hit with COVID in late December after Queensland opened its borders. Robin Brown says her grandmother struggled with being confined to her room for 3 weeks.
She would call us very upset. She would be crying on the phone and making comments such as, I don't want to live anymore. Please get me out of here. I've had enough.
I could hear the caregivers yelling at the residents to get back into their rooms over the phone when I was talking to Mum.
You need to have sunshine. You need to feel sunshine. You need to have fresh air.
Of course, there is always that debate, and personally to me, two things are the big failing of our community and our society today: the daycare and aged care. The two things. If you go back to the olden days, these two institutions did not exist. Aged care, old people's home used to be for someone who was deserted. He didn't have anyone within the community, any family or things like that. Then only someone was put in old people's home. That's going back a while. But these two things is created by the society, by the community, by the norms that we have created upon ourselves. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to Daily India Report.
Welcome to the Daily India Report that brings you glimpses of the changing India. In our first story, India's union government has directed all states and union territories to end additional COVID-19 restrictions as the positivity rate in the country now shows a sustained declining trend. The Government of India has asked all states and union territories to ease additional COVID-19 restrictions that were imposed to contain the unprecedented spike in the COVID cases. The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has written a letter telling the states that the pandemic in the country shows a sustained declining trend. After looking at the current COVID-19 trend and positivity rates in states, the union government feels that the movement of people and economic activities should not be hampered by the additional COVID-19 restrictions. However, the letter asked the states' UTs to continue monitoring the trajectory of cases on a daily basis. Also, the Health Secretary asked states to follow the five-fold strategy of test, track, treat, vaccination and adherence to COVID-appropriate behavior. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India's energy requirements will double in the next 20 years. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his inaugural address at the World Sustainable Development Summit on 16th February 2022, said India's energy needs are expected to double in the next 20 years, adding that denying people energy would be the equivalent of denying life to millions. He made a case that successful climate actions also need adequate financing. For this, developed countries need to fulfill their commitments on finance and technology transfer. In his speech, Modi emphasized, quote, "We firmly believe in fulfilling all our commitments made under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We have also raised our ambitions during COP26 at Glasgow. I firmly believe, and I am sure you would agree, that environmental sustainability can only be achieved through climate justice. Sustainability requires coordinated action for the global commons." End quote. The Indian Prime Minister further said that, quote, "We have heard people call our planet fragile, but it is not the planet that is fragile, it is us. We are fragile. Our commitments to the planet, to nature, have also been fragile. A lot has been said over the last 50 years since the 1972 Stockholm Conference. Very little has been done, but in India we have walked the talk." End quote. India has warned that the developments in Afghanistan would have wider ramifications in the Central Asia region. Ambassador T.S. Tirumurti, India's permanent representative to the United Nations, drew the UN Secretary Council's attention towards the threat of possible growth in international terrorism and drug trafficking following the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. The Indian envoy was participating in an UNSC debate on cooperation between the United Nations and the Collective Security Treaty Organization. The organization, CSTO, comprises Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and is celebrating the 20th anniversary of its establishment. The Indian ambassador stressed that the international community needs to take cognizance of the concerns of the Central Asian countries on developments in Afghanistan. Regional and sub-regional organizations have time and again shown how important is their role in the maintenance of international peace and security. They have an important role in the settlement of disputes, especially in conflict situations. The situation in Afghanistan has deteriorated drastically in the past few months due to a combination of international sanctions, freezing of Afghan assets and suspension of foreign aid after the Sunni Pashtun group took control of Kabul in mid-August. The Taliban, which is looking for recognition from the international community, has repeatedly urged the US to unfreeze Afghan assets, citing the economic crisis. India is launching the first part of the much-awaited national hydrogen policy to boost green hydrogen production in the country. India will allow companies that manufacture green hydrogen to install renewable energy generating plants without transmission costs. India's Power Minister R.K. Singh said that green hydrogen manufacturers can set up renewable energy capacity by themselves. We will give them free transmission until 2025 and banking for 30 days. Banking allows renewable energy producers to transmit unused electricity to the grid, which can subsequently be used whenever needed, he said, adding that transmission charges would be waived for companies setting up manufacturing facilities before 2025. More details on incentives for green hydrogen manufacturing will be made public on 17th February when India releases the first part of its national hydrogen policy. Green hydrogen produced using renewable energy has the best environmental credentials of the various shades of clean burning fuel, which can also be produced using fossil fuel as the energy source to electrolyze water. Tata Sons chairman N. Chandrasekaran, in his maiden address to Air India employees, has laid down a roadmap with 4 core areas for the new management to focus. The Tata Group will make Air India financially fit, upgrade aircraft, bring in a new fleet and make it the most technologically advanced airline globally, Tata Sons chairman N. Chandrasekaran said. Virtually addressing employees of Air India across the globe, he said, for the airline to be the best again, there will be an organizational redesign and it will require a huge transformation, probably the largest transformation and the change all of you would ever go through. The carrier will expand its outreach both domestically and internationally, and it has the desire to connect India with every part of the globe, he added. For Tata Group, Chandrasekaran said the joining of Air India in its fold will help the conglomerate with the opportunity to represent the aspirations of 130 crore Indians, having already touched the lives of 60 crore Indians through its various brands including Taj Hotels, Tanishq, Tata Salt and Jaguar Land Rover. The chairman also said that they will not only increase the number of aircraft that they will have, wide body and narrow body, we will fly to many destinations. Air India Express and AI SATs together have around 15,000 employees. Air India has 12,000 employees and of them 8,000 are permanent. India's Ministry of External Affairs has set up control rooms to assist Indians in Ukraine to provide information and assistance in view of the prevailing situation in Ukraine. India's Ministry of External Affairs on February 16th set up a control room to provide information and assistance to Indian nationals in Ukraine in view of the prevailing situation in that country over its tensions with Russia. Separately, the Indian Embassy in Ukraine has also set up a 24-hour helpline for the Indians in the Eastern European nation. The Indian Embassy in Kyiv said it has been receiving calls about the non-availability of flights from Ukraine to India and advised Indians not to panic but book the earliest available and convenient flights to travel home. For the additional demands, more flights are being planned in the near future, including from Ukrainian International Airlines, Air India, etc. Details on the same would be shared by Embassy as and when confirmed. The embassy advised Indian citizens, especially the students, to temporarily leave that country in view of the uncertainties of the current situation. It also asked Indian nationals to avoid all non-essential travel to and within Ukraine. The MEA said a control room has been set up in the ministry to provide information and assistance. The contact details of the control room in Delhi are phone +91 11 230 12113 +91 11 230 14104 +91 11 230 17905 and 1800 11 8797. Email situationroom@mea.gov.in. The contact details of the helpline in the Indian Embassy in Ukraine are phone +380 9973 00428 +380 9973 00483. Email cons1.grieve@mea.gov.in. Discussions are underway with civil aviation authorities and various airlines on how to increase the number of flights between India and Ukraine. According to an official document, in 2020, Ukraine had a small but vibrant Indian community, and there were about 18,000 Indian students studying in that country. The data is likely to vary in view of the pandemic. Bollywood's attitude queen, also known as Revolver Rani, superstar Kangana Ranaut will soon have a reality show on OTT. Produced by Ekta Kapoor, the show titled Lock Up will stream on MX Player and Alt Balaji from February 27th. In the trailer of Lock Up, Kangana Ranaut appears as a jailer, putting her boss lady attitude on display. She says staying locked up in the show is no less than a nightmare. In her words, "Ab kapde utrenge to sabke samne." Kangana called Lock Up the biggest reality show and its participants India's most controversial celebrities. Considering the color red has become synonymous with the hostage-like situations on screen, the contestants in the trailer are also seen wearing red jumpsuits. Ekta Kapoor, who bankrolled the show, shared the trailer on social media with the text, "Many rules, one queen." As per the makers, Lock Up will put the celebrity contestants through compelling tasks and dramatic situations as they fight to survive in the jail. The show will stream on MX Player and Alt Balaji from February 27th. That's all for this bulletin of Daily India Report.
And thank you very much, Himanshu, and of course, Munish Gupta and Ken Guptaji and the whole family from Delhi. Wonderful to get that report on a daily basis. Well, right now it's time to say goodbye from this segment. Don't forget that tomorrow we'll be back with the weekend edition at 10 a.m. right here on Australian Indian Radio. Hey, it's been wonderful having your company. And don't forget that the views expressed in the presentations are of the presenters themselves. Right now, it's time to say goodbye. Have a wonderful Friday. Thank God it's Friday. There's so much happening out here in Brisbane already. As soon as a little bit of restrictions ease, there's things start taking place once again. And of course, there's lots happening in the weekend as well. Wherever you go, whatever you do, remain safe.